We're in Siman Reish Pei Tes, Seif Beis. Says the Mechaber, Ezehu Mokim Kvi Usa. Where is one meant to be Kaveh the Mezuzah? The answer is B'toich Chalal Shel Pesach, B'tefach HaSamuch L'chutz. So what does that mean? That means that when you have a doorway, so you have two posts and you have a lintel. So a person could be standing in the doorway, right? So if you're standing in the doorway, that's b'toich chalal shel Pesach. B'tefach hasamach l'chutz. So this halacha was mentioned already once in the past, that the mezuzah should be, if the doorway has depth to it, in other words, as you traverse the doorway, you are deeper into the doorway until you enter the home, right? So then the mezuzah should be placed closest to the outer room, right? The mezuzah is always on the right side as you go from the outer room to the inner room. So the mezuzah should be closest to the outer room, which is very...
What you encounter first.
What you encounter first. That's very good. As the Taz says, Hatam sheyipaga b'tchila, you should encounter it first. Va'od sheyeh hakol teich hashmira, because the closer to the outer room the mezuzah is, the more you're covered by the shmira. Right? We mentioned this, I think, in Reish Pei Vav, if I'm not Mr. Reish Pei Hey. V'im shina einay ma'akiv. Now, if you did not do that, so it's not ma'akiv. Now, these words are a little cryptic, but the way some understand it is that anyone who lives in Eretz Yisrael is familiar with the mitzias of aluminum doors. And aluminum doors very often do not allow space for a mezuzah, because the door closes flush into the doorway, and memela, there's no place to put the mezuzah, because the door will knock the mezuzah off when it opens and closes. So what do you have to do? You have to put the mezuzah, what's called, on the face of the post, right? Now, it doesn't have to be on the face of the post. It can be on the back of the post as well, right? It could be on the reverse, on the inside of the room. But that's called, as we saw, I believe, Achayre HaPesach, right? That's one of the, well, we didn't see. That's one of the pshatim. And Achayre HaDeles, right? Means on the post. But the point is that when you put it on the face of the post or on the reverse face of the post, so then it's not, as the Mechaber said, B'toich Chalal Shel Pesach. It's not under the mashkef. Well said. Thank you. It's not under the mashkef. So it seems from the Mechaber that would be ma'akiv, because the Mechaber says, and he doesn't provide any allowance for the mezuzah to be anywhere else. It sounds from the Mechaber like if you live in Eretz Yisrael and your entrance doorway to your building is an aluminum door, which does not allow place for the mezuzah. So the Ashkenazim in the building went and put the mezuzah on the face of the post, and you're a Sfaradi, so you're not Yaitz of the mitzvah, because the Mechaber doesn't say the imshina eine ma'akiv. Only the Ramah says that, and therefore the only Yaitz for a Sfaradi would be to drill into the post, drill into the aluminum. Right? You have people who have a gemach in this country. They have a gemach for drilling into posts of doorways, so that the Sfaradim could be Yaitz of the mitzvah, or that the Ashkenazim could be Yaitz of the mitzvah in the optimal manner. Even the Ramah doesn't hold that this is the optimal manner. He just says it's a heter to put it on the face of the post. However, the Chayadim, I believe, is medayek. I think it's the Chayadim, maybe it's the Aruch Shulchan. I think one says yeah, one says no. I don't remember which one. This heter of not putting the mezuzah in under the mashkef, as Ramosha put it, right, or in the Chalal HaPesach, that heter of putting it on the face of the post is only if it's on the post. But what if there is no post on the face? The face is just a wall, and the post is only in the Chalal HaPesach, but the post doesn't extend to the outer wall, as is often the case. So then you're not Yaitz at all. Now, is this heter of putting it not in the Chalal HaPesach is only if it's on the post. But if it's not on the post, it's just on the wall, then you're not going to be Yaitza, according to some. Now, how high in the doorway should it be? So the Mechaber says, "B'tchilas shlish ha'elyon shel goyva hashar." It should be at the the bottom of the top third. So let's say the doorway, for argument's sake, is 9 feet high, just to use a round number, right? If the doorway is 9 feet high, so the mezuzah should be above 6 feet, right? 2/3 of the doorway above that area. B'tchilas shlish ha'elyon, at the beginning of the top third. So it should be exactly, sounds from the Mechaber, like, should be exactly at 6 feet. Shall gaiva hashar. V'mkava l'mala mizeh. What if you put it at 7 feet? Ksheira, that's fine. However, 7 feet is okay. 8 feet is okay, right? But it has to be lower than a tefach from the top of the doorway, meaning it has to be further than a tefach from the lintel. So above 2/3, but below a tefach from the lintel. Al yamin hanichnas, and it has to be placed on the right side of the person entering the area.
Is that ma'akiv then tefach?
Most hold it's not ma'akiv, the tefach. Haga, ve'ein chiluk beinim hu iter yad oiloi. In other words, this that we're saying that it has to be on the right side as you enter. So this is based on a Gemara that a person lifts his right foot first. So there's a half a minute to say that if a person is left-footed, right? So then I think the Taz adds, the Shach I think adds, if he's left-footed, somebody says over here. Anyway, if a person is left-handed or left-footed, he still would put the mezuzah on the right side. And kavim mismal psula, that is ma'akiv, right? So if you put the mezuzah on the wrong side of the door, so then that's puzzle, and you have to put it back on the right side with a bracha. Now there's a Taz over here that's very negea. If you look, it's in the middle of the Taz of Sif Cotton Gimel. He says, "Umavur b'beis Yosef b'shem haMordechai de'im hi gavoya harbe ein lases mezuzah gavoya mikseifav de'oz einay nira le'einav b'knisa v'yitzia." So this is a very common case, especially at buildings or wedding halls or yeshivas or things like that, where you have a front door that, let's say, is 20 feet high, right? In a palace, you have such a thing. I think by Shar Yafo, if I'm not mistaken, I think there's a very tall door over there. There are places, could be over here in the Merkaz, where you have a very tall door.
I took a picture with yesterday.
Oh, okay.
It's a very, very tall entranceway.
Very good. So that's the shaila. So what do you do when you have a very tall, right? So think about it. Let's say you have a doorway which is 30 feet high, okay? So you're going to put the mezuzah in the top third. So you're going to put the mezuzah 20 feet up in the air. It's not going to be nearest, says the Taz. So therefore, you put it at shoulder height. Now this happens to be a machlokes. There's a Taisus in Menachos, and there's a Yerushalmi about this. And there are different opinions amongst the poskim. So Ravad Yosef actually holds halacha l'maisa that you put it 20 feet high, goes in the top third. That's no matter how high the doorway is. However, most poskim do not agree with that, and the overwhelming majority of poskim, I believe, hold like this Taz, and I think the Shach says it as well in Dalid. You put it at shoulder height. Okay. Now, I was once at a wedding in Lakewood, and Reuvain Feinstein was there, and the hall had very tall doors, and the mezuzah was at shoulder height. And I asked Reuvain Feinstein, right? It would have been baltashkas not to ask him anything, right? So I had to think quick of something to ask. So I went over to Reuvain Feinstein, and I pointed to the mezuzah, which was at shoulder height on this rather tall doorway. And I said to him, did they put the mezuzah in the right place? And he looked, and he said, no. And I said, no? I said, the halacha is that no matter how high it is, you put it in the top third, like Rav Ovadia. I didn't say that, but I said, that's the halacha. So he said, no, that's not the halacha. I said, I'm thoroughly confused. Which one is it? So he explained to me, and I subsequently saw brought that Ramesha held this way as well. If the doorway, that doorway in Lakewood was approximately, let's say, 11 feet high. Okay, so 11 feet high. So what's the upper third? The upper third is about mid 7 feet, right? Something like that. So if a person of average height stands on his tippy toes and sticks his hand up as high as he can, if you can still reach the mezuzah, if it's in the top third, then you should put it in the top third. If, however, a person of average height, reaching as high as he can, standing on his tippy toes, cannot reach the mezuzah if it'll be in the top third, then that's called a Pesach Gavoya, and you put it at shoulder height. So Reuvain Feinstein and Ramesha, they held that that's the shear of a Pesach Gavoya. And if you look in the Pesach, there's a lot of different shiurim given, but we're going to go with that one. I think Rabbi Belsky, so as I said, average person. Rabbi Belsky was very tall. He held that way also, I believe.
I mean, if a doorway doesn't allow a mezuzah to be in the halal because of the door, you could also drill it into or place it within that space.
So I said, Sfardim,
Yeah.
that's what the Sfardim have to do. And there's Gemachim that do that. Yeah, 100%.
What if the door frame has different levels in it? So especially with wooden door frames, you'll find that you measure it from the lowest part or the first part of where you're going to be putting the mezuzah.
So the question being asked is, what if the door frame has different levels within it? Do you put it on the lowest or what's called? So depends what you mean. If you mean something like this doorway, that you have a lintel, and then above the lintel you have a window, and then you have another lintel, right? So if that's what you meant, the answer is then you go by the lowest lintel. That's the kaveya lahalacha. If you would have meant that there's different levels, that the lintel is like staggered, so that's halacha we saw a few days ago, that's called pischei shamay, and that's pater. But when you have multiple lintels, you go by. I was once by a gadol in Yerushalayim. I went to him for a bracha, and after he gave me the bracha, I asked him if I could tell him something chutzpahdik, and he gave me permission, and I told him that his mezuzah was in the wrong place. I must give him credit in front of 25 or 30 people who were waiting. He jumped up and he said, "Show me." And I went out with him in front of 30 people in the living room, and I showed him why his mezuzah was in the wrong place, because it was this type of thing. And he had it mamish like this. In other words, over here, this is exactly a perfect case. You can take a video of this later. This mezuzah is under the top lintel, but the Pesach over here, the real doorway is the lower lintel. So if they want to be Mekayim the mitzvah properly, according to the Mechaber, if this was a Sephardi shul, they would have to drill in. Now, if they want to do it properly, even according to the Ashkenazim, they shouldn't have it where it is. They should have it on the post. In other words, that would be a chayrei hadelas. No, so the way it is now is just nothing. This is no good at all. It should be on the post itself. That's right. It should be on the post itself. So, see? So we fell into a perfect situation over here to illustrate an improperly placed mezuzah.
It's within a tefach.
It's within a tefach, but it's not on the post. It's exactly what we just read. Ubilvad she'ani chena b'mezuzah atzma. This is not b'mezuzah atzma. This is on.
If there were no door there,
It still would have to be under the lower lintel.
well, you have a choose a Pesach of the big one too.
Yeah, but the big one is nizbatel by the lower lintel. The lower lintel is mevatel the upper lintel. So therefore, it has to be under the lower lintel.
This is under the upper lintel.
Right. Right. See, Zalman gets it. That's it. So this is no good. That's the post. What Rav Zalman is pointing to, that's the post. So it should be on the post.
Should be in that.
Should be in, right. Ideally, you should drill in over there. And if you can't drill in, then it should be on the post, either on the front of the post or on the back of the post. Either way, Acher Moshe holds the back is also okay. The minig usually is on the front. It should be on the opposite side. But this is nothing. This is what I was looking for. If you're looking at the Taz in Sifkat and Gimel, Al Yamin HaNichnas, there's two Gimels. There's a Gimel and then there's Gimel with an asterisk. So the Gimel with the asterisk. Al Yamin HaNichnas, T'chsiv Beisecha, Hainu Derech Biascha, V'stam Adam Oker Kari Yamina B'Reish. A person lifts his right foot first. V'afim Hu Iter, so that's what I was saying. L'chara, this means an Iter regel, right? V'afim Hu Iter. Now, I don't know if such a thing, you have to ask the soccer players, is there such a thing as bats right, kicks left? I don't know if such a mitzias exists, but if it does, V'imhu iter mikol makam acher roi b'nei habayis as linan goes basa roi b'nei habayis, which l'chayra is also not true, because let's say you have a house full of lefties, so you still don't put it on the left. It means roi b'nei adam, doesn't mean roi b'nei habayis. Maybe that's what the correction is over here. Yeah, haloshan eine meduktik. There you go. Okay. Halacha Gimel. Another very exciting halacha. Misha chaylik beisay l'shnayim. Somebody who splits his house into two. Ubechol chaylik pesach pasuach l'shus harabim. Okay, so this is a common case. The Yavitz writes that his house was like this. What does that mean? That means that there was an entrance from two opposite streets. Right? Notice his house the front of the house was on East 23rd Street, the back of the house is on East 24th Street, and you could enter the house from either side, right? Depending on which shul you wanted to daven in that day, right? So you could enter the house. I was by someone in Rechavia, he has this, right? His weekday shul, he exits his house from one street, and his Shabbos shul, he exits his house from the other street, right? So, yesh pesach miseh. And then in his house, he has doorways. So now it depends on which way you enter your house. If you enter your house from street A, then the flow of traffic is in that direction, heading towards street B. If you entered your house from street B, then the flow of traffic is towards street A. So where do you put the mezuzah? Right? So the halacha is b'makom she'oisa hacharsha b'saf shetzir hadeles seiviv bay. The place where you stick the hinge in the doorway, I'll explain this in a minute. Shetzir hadela sayivay, that the door swings on the hinge. Umamid sham hadlasis, and you hang the doors from those hinges. Hu habayis. That's the bias. Ubederach yamin shenechnasim loy kayvim oisa. So the Paiskim explained this to mean in simple English, the direction that the door swings. So again, you have a home, and you have a room in the middle of the home, you have a doorway in the middle of the home, and you don't know which way is the yamin. If I'm coming from this street, this is the yamin, and if I'm coming from this street, this is the yamin. So where do I put the mezuzah? I'm supposed to put the mezuzah on the right side. So there's no way of being kefeya. So you look at the door. If the door swings this way, then this is the yamin. If the door swings this way, so then this would be the yamin.
I don't think that's sham.
Too bad. That's what all the Paiskim say. Yeah, because they used to
have the doors
Correct.
like that.
That's
The
what.
door could swing in both directions.
That's correct.
So if it swings in both directions, then
That's That's correct. But the Paiskim say the practical application. No, you're right. Back up a second. The practical application of this halacha, the Paiskim explain, is that the direction that the door swings, that's the entrance to the room. Yes. Now you are raising a question. You're raising a question. What if you have a restaurant and the door from the kitchen, right, or a saloon, like we mentioned, right, back in the 1880s, you're entering the saloon and the doors swing in both directions, right? So there, it's possible that if there was only by a saloon, there's usually two doors, and by a restaurant, there's two doors. But if it would be just one door, so then ein chanami, then pashtas, the side that had the actual hinges on the side, that would be the yamin, and that's what this is saying. But on a regular door, a modern standard door, the place can understand it to mean the room that the door opens into.
So the hinges are irrelevant.
Correct. The hinges are irrelevant. Correct. The hinges are irrelevant if the door swings in only one direction. Yes. Says the Shach in Sivkot and Vav. Now, this is also, this we discussed already, but it's very, very important. Ve'ena yadua eze choshev knisa yitzia, right? Now, if you're entering from street A, it's this way. If you're entering from street B, it's this way. So you don't know which way is knisa and which way is yitzia. So hilka chazlinan basar heker tzir. Okay. Because of our terazov, that's the levush. Upesach shenechnasim by min habayis lebeis hachayrev shalanu. They had a certain type of room called a beis hachayrev near Elisha, which apparently it was unclear which is the knisa and which is the yitzia. So says the levush near Elisha Eisen Mezuzah be min haknisa shenechnasim min habayis lebeis hachayrev. Why? The ikar tashmish shalanu hu bebatei hachayrev shalanu. So what's important to know about this shach and this is something that all the poskim say, is that Heker Tzir is not the default way of resolving a shaila, which is the Knisa and which is the Yisiyah. The default way is, as we mentioned in the past, the Machlekes Ramesha and Rabbi Elyashiv. According to Ramesha, it's Reuv Knisis, whatever the norm is. Ramesha holds that in a place where you can't tell which way is the Knisa, which way is the Yitziyah, so if 80% of the time people are going in this direction, this is the Knisa. If 80% of the time people are going in this direction, this is the Knisa. And Rabbi Elyashiv holds that it goes Basar Chashivas. If one room is more chashiv than the other, so then that's the Knisa. So what does Rabbi Elyashiv base his shita on? He bases it on this shach, which is, I believe is coming from, well, it's a lavush, right? It's coming from the lavush. So that's what Rabbi Elyashiv is basing his shita on. So where does Rav Moshe get his shita from? So Rav Moshe brings multiple rise to his shita, and if I'm not mistaken, this lavush, Rav Moshe explains like himself, that the lavush doesn't mean to say that Iker Tashmish is the Keveya. The lavush just means to say that if that's the Iker Tashmish, so then Reuv is in that direction. That's what he means. Doesn't mean that the more chashav a room is Keveya. Rav Moshe says you don't find anywhere in Rishonim or Achreinim that the more chashav a place makes it the Iker Klape Hilchas Mezuzah. Hilchas Mezuzah is totally in Knisa B'Yitziyah. So Rav Moshe says, so whichever place is Reuv Knisas, that's the Knisa. Doesn't make a difference which room is more chashav. And he disputes the understanding of this lavush. So this lavush is very, very fundamental and important lavush. Okay. This is Sivkot and Vav in the Shach.
Chashav, how do you define chashav?
Oh, how do you define chashav? Very good. So that's also a machlekes Rav Moshe and Rabbi Elyashiv. Rabbi Elyashiv says that let's say Rabbi Landau was coming to your house. So where would you sit with him? You'd sit with him in the living room, right? Or in the dining room, right? Probably the dining room. So would you sit with him in the kitchen? No. Right? So Mela, if you have a doorway like this between your kitchen and your dining room, so Rabbi Elyashiv says, so the dining room is more chashiv, because if you had a chashiv a visitor, you would sit in the dining room, not in the kitchen. Rabbi Moshe says, no. Rabbi Moshe says, where do you spend 95% of your time? In your kitchen. Where do you spend 5% of your time? In your dining room. So your kitchen is more chashiv than your dining room. So Rabbi Moshe disputes Rabbi Elyashiv that more chashiv is keveya. And even in what's called more chashiv, he also disputes Rabbi Elyashiv. So you have a double machlekes. Now, why does Rabbi Moshe dispute Rabbi Elyashiv, and which one is more chashiv? Who cares? He holds chashiv is not keveya anyway. So the answer is because Rabbi Moshe holds, what if you don't have Reuv Knisas? What if it's 50-50? So then Rabbi Moshe, then he's nachas to this idea that maybe chashivas would be kaveya. In other words, even before Heker Tzir. Now, all of this comes before Heker Tzir, which is not like Minik Chabad. Minik Chabad, they hold Heker Tzir comes first. But there's nobody else who goes with that.
So when there's a machlokas like this, is it ever recommended to put up two mezuzahs, one on each side?
So the Yavitz in that tshuva where he describes his house, so he says he was mesupik what to do. So he put up two mezuzahs in his own house. And the Binyan Tzion also describes a similar shaila. It's not exactly the same, but also the Binyan Tzion had a shaila in his home where to put a mezuzah. And so he writes that he put up two. And he writes that I'm printing this in a tshuva so that if anyone has ha'aris, let me know. So the Maram Shik wrote him a tshuva, and he said, you better have ha'aris. You're not allowed to do that. It's Bal Taisif. So the Binyan Tzion wrote back to him that it's not Bal Taisif. So the Maram Shik wrote back to him that it is Bal Taisif. So Rabbi Elyashiv Paskin, and I think the Chazon Ish held this way also, which is something that's going to sound like a joke, but it's not. They say that you're not allowed to do it because it's near a Bal Taisif. Now, it's not actual Bal Taisif, but it's near a Bal Taisif. So that sounds funny, but there actually is a halachic concept of near a Bal Taisif, and therefore we are not knowing that way. But the Yavitz and the Binyan Tzion actually in their own homes did put up two mezuzahs. I heard about Rav Shmuel Auerbach that when he was nifter, or when he moved, he used to live, I think, on Rehov Gesher Chaim, then he moved somewhere else. And when he sold his house, the person who bought the house did construction, and they found hidden in the wall another mezuzah on the opposite side. Now, he put up 2 mezuzahs, but he didn't want anyone to know, and it was hidden in the wall. Kach shamati.